Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to answer that musical question, or at least propose the question. I don't think I have the answer. What's the deal with Andris Nelsons, conductor of the Boston Symphony and other things? But before we get to that, I have to address an issue that has come up. Some of you have asked, is this yet another Tam Tam in the back? And indeed it is. It's a very, very large, what they call a wind gong. Now, wind gongs are not like normal tam-tams. They're actually gongs, first of all, but they do not have a turned-in rim on the edge. They are flat discs, and they are made of thinner metal, and because of that, they speak very, very rapidly, and they have a wonderful tone, which is nice and swooshy without having, metallic overtones or actual pitch suggestions. At least the good ones do, and this is a good one. This is also a very big one. It's about as big as they come, around 40 inches or so, or 38, 40, 42, somewhere in there. It's really, really big. And here it is. Let me just show you how quickly this thing speaks and how nice it sounds when it does. Splendid, isn't it? But unlike the regular tam-tams, it doesn't have a very deep fundamental tone, and it doesn't get as loud as they do because it's just not heavy enough. And as a result of that, they're not used in regular symphony orchestras as often as I feel they should be. I mean, this one would be absolutely perfect, for example, in Der Abschied and Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde, for all those quiet strokes on the deep tam-tam that Mahler requires. In fact, I think Haitink, in his Concertgebouw recording of Mahler 2, must have used something similar, because it has a sound rather like that. And it is just a tremendously marvelous instrument that should be used more frequently. But anyway, so that's the new Tam Tam. Let's talk about Nelsons, Andris Nelsons. Oh boy, what are we going to do about Andris Nelsons? Here's the thing. All of these conductors have earned their keep by giving live concerts, obviously, not from giving recordings, not from making recordings. But for most of us, our experience of them will be through the recordings. And as a recording artist, Mr. Nelsons has been singularly unimpressive, particularly in his recordings on Deutsche Grammophon. He did some good things on Orfeo, you may recall, when he was with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. There was good Shostakovich, which he has since remade in Boston. There was some Richard Strauss. No question he's got the chops. He knows how to do it. The real issue for me is, what does he do well? I would love for him to chime in and ask and answer this question. What does he think he does well? What represents him best? What composers really appeal to him? Because his recording program with Deutsche Grammophon is completely twisted. First of all, they gave him a Beethoven cycle with the Vienna Philharmonic. Then they gave him a Bruckner cycle with the Gewandhaus Orchestra of Leipzig. And now he's doing a Shostakovich cycle in Boston. Now, of course, the Beethoven and Bruckner cycles are associated with German orchestras known for that repertoire. The Boston Symphony was nobody's idea of a Shostakovich orchestra, which meant that it could actually have turned out to be interesting, and indeed, up until now, and we'll get to this in a moment too, it has been the most interesting and the most successful of all of those recordings. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Beethoven. Why on earth do we need another Beethoven cycle from Andris Nelsons? What has he got to say about Beethoven? First of all, you've got the Vienna Philharmonic. The Vienna Philharmonic can play a Beethoven cycle without any conductor at all, and probably do it better than with most conductors, because most conductors, as I've said many times, just get in the way. The orchestra knows it very, very well. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that Vienna Philharmonic Beethoven cycles are kind of like those carnival games. You know, the carnival games with, like, you put the money in and you turn the crank and the crane comes down and it picks out like something and drops it in the slot. Well, that's what happens with the Vienna Philharmonic Beethoven cycles. You know, you have a giant a giant gripper, which is the Vienna Philharmonic, and you have the heads of all of these conductors lying around where all the toys are, and the gripper comes down and it just grabs a conductor and takes him over, and drops him into the slot, and voila, you have the Simon Rattle Beethoven cycle, you have the Andris Nelsons Beethoven cycle, you have whoever it is. And whatever ideas they bring to the table are almost always bad ones. And Nelson's Beethoven cycle in Vienna was absolutely dreadful. I mean, it was just unnatural and odd and uninteresting all at once. And it's hard to be odd and uninteresting at once, but this one managed. Then we go to Bruckner. Oh, God. Why does anyone do Bruckner? The reason they do Bruckner is because everybody already did Mahler. I think that must be the only reason, because we don't need another Mahler cycle, you know? So now they're all doing Bruckner. He's the composer du jour, the flavor of the month. And you have the singular advantage over Mahler in that the orchestras are, at least until you get to the 8th Symphony, somewhat smaller. And even more to the point, much easier to conduct because they're all in a moderate, 4 or a moderate 3 time. And the Gewandhaus Orchestra of Leipzig, once again, could play Bruckner without any conductor at all. And I know they could do it better than they do with Andris Nelsons, whose feeling for Bruckner is completely non-existent. It's just terrible. In fact, I really think if I had lots of money, I would hire an orchestra like the Gewandhaus and say, okay, guys, Bruckner 7, and I'd give a downbeat and I'd sit down and just let them do their thing. And I would have this as a reference so that we could compare the conductorless version to every other conductor who does the same music with that orchestra and has the chutzpah to record it. In fact, I think we should do that with all of these orchestras. They should all have to do an iconic work with no conductor at all, and then make every conductor they work with make a record so we can see if they'll do a better job. And I guarantee you that 99 times out of 100, those conductors will not do a better job. And Nelsons and Bruckner does not do a better job. All of which brings us to Shostakovich, the third in the triple crown of his Deutsche Grammophon career. Now, up until this point, the Shostakovich symphonies have been very, very good. But then he released this bow wow, Symphonies 1 and 15, and 14 also, pardon me, with the Chamber Symphony. Now, how do you wreck Shostakovich's first symphony? I'll tell you how. Well, first of all, you can check out my review on ClassicsToday.com. It's not behind a paywall. Just go read it if you want. But, the first movement of Shostakovich's first is wonderfully bitter and ironic and alternates with that totally sweet balletic second subject. It's just so much fun. It has so much wit and, sardonic character to it. Well, one way to mess it up is to take every single phrase in its own tempo. And that's exactly what Nelsons does. It is so disjointed. I mean, the disjointedness is written into it. You don't have to mess with it the way he does. But, it's like, dum ba da dum bum ba, da 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 da, da da ba ba da da da. Well, it's like, dum ba da dum bum ba, da 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 da, da 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 da. It's just silly. And the scherzo is a blur, and the slow movement's okay because you can't wreck it, and the finale is as bad as the first movement, and then we get on to the 15th. The 15th is actually a nice coupling of the first symphony because it returns to that strange mix of bitterness and parody and sardonic wit on the one hand, and deep gloom and misery. And you don't need to take either of those things to extremes because, like I said, the extremes are written into the music. And, when the William Tell Overture pops up in the first movement, it's funny. You don't have to do anything to it. It's just funny. Just play it with a little bit of point and a little bit of wit. And Nelsons doesn't manage that. He's too busy fussing and futzing with little bits and phrases and things. And then when you get to the finale, Now, the center part of the finale is a big, long Passacaglia. And it's a dark, dark, dark movement, full of gloom and doom. But you can't take it too slowly, or else it just gets boring, because the textures are so sparse, and the whole thing is so wintry and chill and bleak. It's got to move. It doesn't move. It doesn't move at all. And in this 14th symphony, well, the second movement, Malagueña, as I say in the review, is really too slow and too heavy. But here, Nelsons is just accompanying. And he accompanies quite well. The problem is the soloist. Well, the bass soloist, who is Alexander Cymbalyuk. Cymbalyuk, yes. Ukrainian name, anyway. I'm not sure if he's from there. I assume he is. Very, very fine bass soloist, and he sings really, really well. But the soprano is Christine Opele, or Opelés, however she pronounces it. And, oh dear, she's one of those, I don't know where she's from either, but I can tell you, Slavanska Wobelskaya is her stage name, because when she sings quietly, like in Three Lilies, a very sad, sad song, it's very beautiful. She's fine. But as soon as she gets to mezzo forte or above, the voice starts to wah, 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 and then it gets harsher and wobblier and uglier the higher and louder it gets. So that kind of makes the 11th a lot less moving and expressively fulfilling than it should be. And then you also get the Chamber Symphony in C minor, which is an arrangement of the 8th String Quartet. That is one of Shostakovich's most personal pieces. I mean, they think he was basically suicidal when he wrote it. And it's so intense and so tragic, and it quotes his own musical monogram and the tragic theme from the second piano trio, and all of these tunes that come back. And there's so much stuff in there that you can make something out of. And here what we get is very pretty playing. And very pretty playing is very nice, but there is a time to make the tone a little rougher and give the music a little more edge. And Nelsons doesn't do that either. Now, I'm not trying to dump on this just to be gratuitous. The point I'm trying to make is, we thought that maybe Shostakovich was the thing he did really well. Maybe that was his fach. And so he was going to do a bang-up Shostakovich cycle, and we could ignore Beethoven and Bruckner, because nothing is easier to ignore than yet another Beethoven or Bruckner cycle. But as it turns out, most of the Shostakovich has been very good, but this really isn't. I don't know whether it's the circumstances or live recording, or he was having a bad day, or I don't know. I can't explain why. But this new release is really, really profoundly uninteresting when it isn't infuriating. And it makes me wonder, what on earth is this guy really good at? And is his label doing him justice by letting him record all this stuff? And is he just an idiot for recording it in the first place? Because let's face it, these people will do whatever they're told to do, or whatever they get a chance to do, because they don't know when they're going to get another chance. And if someone told me I would get a Beethoven cycle with the Vienna Philharmonic, I mean, I would, yay, the Hurwitz Beethoven cycle is coming. I mean, who'd say no? The only difference is I wouldn't conduct it. I just let them put my name on it after the orchestra played it by themselves. Same thing with the Gewandhaus in Bruckner. So I'm puzzled. I am puzzled. I'm confused. And the guy, a conductor of this ability, does not get an orchestra like the Boston Symphony unless he's got the talent and the musicality, and he's done his homework. And I'm sure that there are subscription concerts, during the year that are marvelous. It's a pity we don't get to hear them. Or maybe we do now that everybody has a digital portal or something. I don't know. But what does he do better than anyone else? That is the question. And will he have the opportunity to make those records? What's very interesting is that, Boston was one of those orchestras that had its own label. It hasn't issued anything in a very, very long time. Probably now that Deutsche Grammophon has Nelsons and they're doing Shostakovich, they feel they don't need to. I think that's a shame. I think once the conductor and the orchestra really get to know each other and are working together, and he has the opportunity to put his imprint on the sound that the orchestra makes, assuming, of course, that he has personality to imprint in the first place, which the jury is out. We don't know yet. It would really be good if they would do a recording program of something besides like Brahms Symphonies, something that would really allow Nelsons to be himself and tell us who he is. Happily, he has a long career ahead of him, most likely, and there's always the possibility that that breakthrough will occur. But until then, I'm not impressed. I'm just not impressed. So we do need to keep on listening, folks, but not so much to this guy at this point. We'll see what develops. Stay tuned, and I promise to let you know. Thanks a lot. Take care.